Okay, so I will just give you a short, some updates in catch welfare science. But my presentation will focus not only on catch welfare itself, but I will also look a little at the intersection of fishing practices, technology, environment, and animal welfare as well. So just a very brief overview. So these are the things I will be talking about. I will look a little into climate change and heat waves, and I will show you a study that we did here at Nofima about the effects of heat wave on animal welfare. We're also getting a little bit into biodegradable fishing gears, and also some studies on incentives for using new technology to improve animal welfare. And then I will end my presentation with some examples of real-time monitoring technology on fish welfare. So just to begin then, so of course climate change will have an impact on fish in quite multiple ways. We know that elevated temperatures speed up fish metabolism. This can increase their need for oxygen and food, both of which can be limited also in warmer waters. There's also habitat losses and changes. And I think the most classic example is, of course, when temperature rises. We have all heard about what happens to coral reefs, but there are also other ecosystems that are really important for fish that can be altered or even destroyed. And that also leaves fish without suitable habitats. We're also seeing shifts in where fish species live. And many fish migrate to cooler areas, and that affects local ecosystem. Fishing industries that rely on specific species in certain regions can also think about how this affects the fishing and the practices that are used today and fishing operations, and which type of gears the fishermen are used to using. And when with new species coming into waters, it's important to use the right type of fishing gears, because that will also affect the fish welfare. And then, of course, also warmer waters can encourage the spread of diseases and parasites, which also affects fish welfare and survival. And all these things were a bit of a background that we did an experimental study about 2 years ago in a project that I was leading. And we looked at both the effect of heat waves and also acidification. So the study had quite a simple setup. We had one control group, which was always at 8 degrees and had normal pH. And then we had another group that we exposed to a heat wave for 5 days. So we had first an 8-day increase in temperature from 8 to 16 degrees, which doesn't seem much for many, but in the Arctic waters, it's very warm for the fish. And then it was reduced again. And then at the end, we also did a stress trial on these fish. And then another group that both were exposed to a heat wave and also a lower pH in their water during the experimental stage. I will not get into very much detail about this. It's still preliminary results. But if anyone has more, I will show you some results. And if you have questions, feel free to contact me. I will show you my email at the end of this presentation. So what we found was that we definitely saw some clear signs that heat waves affect fish welfare. And we noticed that the fish metabolism went up, and we also saw that their skin barrier weakens and that their wound healing abilities were compromised. We saw a drop in their immune response, and their scales also had weaker mineralization. So this was for the group of fish that were exposed to either both the heat wave and acidification or both of them. So we believe that these changes show that the fish are under a lot of stress during heat waves, and they might not be able to handle extra stress like capture. I think this also has some important takeaways for how we approach fishing during and right after heat waves in the future. And because we see that fish in these conditions are much more vulnerable to stress and injury, so we may need to rethink certain practices, for example, catch and release or slipping operations. And even if fish are released, the stress of being captured in the first place might be just too much for them. But of course, to know this for sure, we will need even more studies than this one. I think it's also important to think about how often we check nets, such as gill nets during heat waves, and leaving fish confined for too long could definitely add to the stress that they are already experiencing from the heat wave. And I think that this data really shows a need for a more adaptive management of fishery. So what I mean is that we need to adjust our fishing practices based on the environmental condition as well to better protect fish welfare in the future, where we believe that there will be even more extreme weather. So that was just a bit on the climate change. So I also want to talk a bit about biodegradable fishing gears. And the background for this is actually quite a historic verdict, because this case that I'm showing you right now, this really marks a historic moment in Norway, because for the first time, a fisherman has been sentenced under the Animal Welfare Act. And I think this is really a clear signal that animal welfare laws are not just guidelines, they're also enforceable regulations, and they do have real consequences. So this fisherman, he received a 30-day prison sentence due to very serious violations. And this was then, he did not check his nets from November 2021 until March 2022, which of course is a very serious crime. And many maybe think he should get an even stronger sentence than this. But the results of him not checking his nets was that 23 porpoises and a lot of fish, a lot of king crabs were just found dead. So this really shows the devastating impact of neglecting fishing operations. And I think it also shows that fishers really are accountable for regulating net checks to prevent this unnecessary suffering. So to protect, and in this case, the nets were of course intentionally left unchecked, which is why he was sentenced. But in other situations, nets can be lost due to weather conditions or other unforeseen events. And that's when you get this ghost fishing. And this is a really big problem in our oceans, both contributing to pollution and of course is a very big problem for the animals and endangering the marine life. So that's why I just wanted to give you a little update on what's happening in the science world of biodegradable fishing gears. And there's quite a lot of exciting development going on that could really help tackle these issues of ghost fishing. So the problem is, of course, that when a fishing gear is lost at sea, it just keeps on fishing. And this can go on for years and even decades. And that's why many researchers are now looking more into biodegradable materials, which will reduce this impact because they will naturally break down over time. And there's quite a lot of cool inventions going on. Some are using new materials, like certain polymers. People are using bamboo. And some are even looking into using lactic acid. But still, there's quite a lot of challenges. And now biodegradable gears are about 11 to 16% weaker than traditional nylon. And this seems to impact how effective it is for catching fish. So clearly there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to make it as strong and also as reliable as the conventional gears. But there are some good news here. There are some new manufacturing methods using, for example, 3D printing that seems to be working quite well. There's still, of course, a lot of research still needing to be done here. But if we can improve both the durability and accessibility of biodegradable gears, it could be a practical solutions and a good sustainable options for fishermen. But it's still very important to know which incentives we are going to use to get fishers to actually use this and also to use other new technologies. Because this can be very challenging, and that leaves us to what I want to talk about, some studies on incentives for getting fishers to use new technologies. And there are a few key motivators and barriers in this topic. And I think economics could be a very strong incentives if it can improve efficiency and if it can boost the income. And this would obviously be a very big draw for the fishers. But there are also quite a lot of challenges here. Many fishers, and especially smaller operators, they will have limited access to modern equipments, and also they will face quite tough competitions from the larger industries. And also, of course, unpredictable weather. Climate change can also make it harder for fishermen to really want to and dare to invest and rely on new technology. There's also a social side to this. There was a couple of studies showing that peer influence and community dynamics plays a very big role. And fishers who are part of an active and social network where they regularly share information and resources are much more likely to try out new technology. And that's quite interesting. So that means that if one person in the group finds a piece of technology that he thinks is very useful, then others are much more likely to also give it a shot. So if you want to encourage the adoption of new and sustainable practices, both the economic incentives and community support needs to be part of the approach. And there's also another one that I didn't mention yet, which is regulatory incentives. And we actually did a study on this. So this study was done by two of my colleagues, Katrine Eriksen and Gerson Grunvåg. And it's a part of a project I was leading, actually the same project as the climate change study I showed you earlier. And they looked into using a special tool, which is called a catch limiting device in the demersal fishing for Atlantic cod. And the aim of the study was to see if economic incentives or regulatory measures are needed to encourage the use of a catch limiting device to improve fish welfare and quality. So just show you very quickly, this is a catch limiting device, and it's designed to limit the number of fish caught in a single haul. So the more fish that is coming into the net, it kind of closes up and an opening comes, so the fish doesn't go into the net anymore, but leaves the net instead. It's supposed to mean less crowding and fewer injuries and smaller catches. And in theory, this could lead to better fish welfare and also possibly higher quality in the catch. But there is a challenge, because right now using this device is optional in Norway. And there's little incentives for fishers to use it because they don't really get paid for smaller and higher quality catches. So the big question is then, should we introduce incentives like a price boost for smaller catches to encourage its use, or should we think about regulations to make it mandatory? This study was done using economic modeling, and it showed that while these catch limiting devices could help to improve fish welfare and quality, there's very little financial incentives right now for the fishermen to actually use them. And that means that we might need some regulations to push this forward if we want these practices to be widely adopted. And in the long run, maybe a mix of market incentives and regulations could be the best way to promote more sustainable and ethical fishing. So this leads me to a bit of the last part. I will just give you very short and just two examples of using real-time monitoring on fish welfare, because there are already some technologies available that could help us to evaluate and monitor fish welfare during capture, so when the fish is still in the fishing gears. The first one is not a new study. This is from, I think, 2009. And this is the split beam echo sounder, and it has been shown to be a promising technology and could monitor fish welfare during capture. So what this actually does is it tracks tailbeat frequencies. And in that sense, we can get a real-time sense of fish activity. So you can get swimming speed, and in that sense, you can also get energy use, which can be very good indicators of stress. And the same way you can analyze also how fish are schooling, look at their movement patterns and coordination. This tells a lot about their behavior, and again, could be an indicator of stress. So that's just one example. And the second example I wanted to show you is a study that I did, again, together with colleagues from Nofima. And that's use of this sensor globe. It's this little ball that you can see here. And that you can either make it float or you can make it sink, and you can attach it to a net. And that's what we did in this study. We used demersal seines. We attached this little sensor, which can measure oxygen, and it can measure temperature, and also measures a kind of shock. So when something hits it or when it's dropped, which is measured in type of acceleration. So we attached this to the demersal seine, and it went along the entire fishing operation. So it went down to the bottom, and it also went up, and then it was released. So it was pumped on board together with the fish. So it kind of went through everything that the fish was going through. And the results look something like this. Here you can see that we measured both temperature, dissolved oxygen, and acceleration, and we see all these little lines going up and down. Luckily, we timed when everything was done, and when we looked at the timing, we see that it fits very well with what we would expect to happen. So then we can we see that, for example, in the beginning at number 1, we see that the gear is being deployed. So the temperature quite quickly drops as the sensor is going into the water. And at the same time, there's an increase in oxygen, most likely due to all the bubbles that comes when the gear is being deployed. During towing, it's not so much happening. Then we see some fish at number 3 start entering the net. There's something starting to happen. And what is quite interesting is at number 5, so at 4, we start holdback. So bringing the gear to the surface, this was at the bottom about 150 meters deep. And suddenly there's this huge increase in oxygen. And that is actually when the swim bladder of the fish ruptures, and we could measure that using the sensor globe. And we also can measure when it's crowding. And then we saw that when the sensor at number 7 is when it went through the pump, which seems to be quite a hard shock. And also we could see then when we accidentally dropped it onto the floor, it was also measured in this little increase in acceleration. And then we packed it away. So we saw this as quite a promising method for also real-time monitoring of fish welfare, because we get all this data just into an app on our phone while we're using it. And these were just some few science flashbacks for you. I suppose there's not really time for questions here, but you will be able to, if you just send me an email, I'm willing to send you this presentation, or if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm very happy to talk to any of you. So thank you very much.
Hi, Ragnhild. Can you hear me, Ragnhild?
Yeah.
Oh, we do have time for questions, actually.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
And I'd like to encourage anybody who's listening in to send some questions in on the chat. If for whatever speaker, Michelle will ask the speaker questions from the chat, and I will ask people questions from the room here. So, yeah, it was great presentation as always. Thanks, Ragnhild. That was nice. There was a few things that caught my interest. I mean, I think you raised the point about which I know your colleagues in Nofima have been talking about for a while now. The fact that quality isn't always related to price. That's a big deal, because we're saying how important catch welfare is for quality, but if there's no financial benefits, yes, I think you're right. I think we need to look at regulation, and I know there's a few people from various governments in Europe listening in today, and it would be very interesting to hear their perspectives. If they're willing to send some comments in on the chat, it'd be good. That would be really good to hear from. So thank you if you're willing to share your opinions on the potential for regulation. Yeah, climate change, that is a big one. We know climate change is a fact. It is going to be. We know it's already affecting distribution of targeted populations of fish. And it's going to be affecting catchability as well. It does affect behaviour, as you've shown. It was interesting. You said about regulation and adaptable management in terms of in terms of weather events, not specifically climate change, but extreme weather events. I mean, are you proposing, well, in the extreme case, sort of closing fisheries in the event of a heat wave or an extreme weather event? Is that where you're thinking?
Well, of course, I think in a dream scenario and considering animal welfare, especially things such as catch and release, I think could easily be said to, for certain types of fisheries, could be said that if at least very strong guidelines that should maybe not be done in these extreme events, because we really see that it affects the fish and they can't handle the stress very well when they've been exposed to heat waves. So I think it would be a very good thing to do. I'm not sure if it's practical, but yeah, it is what I've suggested. Yeah,
I would anticipate pushback, but yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, we know as scientists that stress is cumulative. So the more stress you put on the animal, the more stresses, the closer you get it to that threshold that we talk about in terms of fatality and sort of non-recoverable events. So yeah, I think you have a very good point. I mean, it's a bit of a scary point, but it's something we have to face up to if we want fisheries to be sustainable in the future. So I think it was a very, very valid point. Have we got questions coming in?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions coming
Excellent.
in. Here one from Anonymous, most of them are, by the way. In the economic driving system, from your perspective, how can we encourage the government from regulation and industry to focus more on welfare?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Any
To
ideas?
motivate, no. I think we, as a researcher, all I can say is like, I will keep up the good research, kind of, and I hope someone sees it. And
Yeah,
I hope
that's your role.
Yeah, it's. I hope people take it seriously. And how to get people to take it seriously, I think that's a really, really big question.
Yeah.
But I think like this platform is it's a good starting point.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree, surprisingly.
If
Mike, do you have any thoughts on what governments and regulations can do, or how they can?
Can I add a comment to that? You're right. This platform is an important start, and our role as scientists is to provide best advice. But I think in terms of what can governments do, well, actually in Norway just recently we were having a review of the Animal Welfare Act, which Ragnhild spoke about in terms of that first fisherman being prosecuted under the Animal Welfare Act. I want to come back to you on that. There's another thing I noted. But I think the role of governments, as I see it, my perspective as a scientist is to take best advice from researchers and from the industry, to have dialogue with the various stakeholders within an industry and base future regulation on an adult conversation with all the key members. And that's what we're beginning to experience in Norway in terms of how they're approaching the revision of the Animal Welfare Act. So the first thing they've done is they approached us as scientists and said, can we have your advice?
Yep.
So we have science-based regulation, but it doesn't end there. They have dialogue and discussions with industry as well. How can things be made practical?
Yep.
And I think that's an important. That's the only way forward, realistically.
And funding.
Yeah, and funding. But I mean, regulation is never going to work unless you get buy-in from the industry that it's regulating.
True.
So.
All right, and then we got another question or remark. Difficult to push for premiums, and bringing in the mandatory regulations can be contentious. This requires out-of-the-box thinking. Could we campaign for a tax relief for using catch-limiting devices, for example? How do you feel about that, Ragnhild?
Well, it's not about feelings, but
what are your?
That is what has been suggested. by my colleagues who did the studies on use of either economic or regulatory incentives.
Yeah.
That up at time, but of course the problem if the price premium won't work, or it needs to be in combination with regulations, because the market will not fix it itself.
No.
No.
Okay. Another one, a very more specific one. Great talk, Ragnhild. It was said about the sensor globe. Do you see it live on your phone, like even when it's down at 150 meters, or you read it back when it's on deck?
No, we have to. So in that sense, it's semi real time indeed. No, because no, it does. It's actually via Bluetooth. So my Bluetooth does not work down to 150 meters.
Okay, so when it comes back to the surface, you get the information.
Yeah, but then you can combine, of course, the information with, for example, the quality of the catch.
Yeah. There was a question of Lena, by the way.
Yeah, we've Lena's been using oxygen sensors in cod ends in pelagic trawls, and in purse seine we've been using monitoring systems which. Some are self-recording and some provided live feed on oxygen data. So it is possible to get live feed information. But with purse seine, we're looking at it's very much based at the surface, and it's not. We're not trying to monitor 150, or in pelagic fisheries can be down to 400 meters.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe someday in the future. Then a question that I can easily answer myself. Do you record the conference? Yes, we do. And they will be available later. I can't promise like the next day, but they will be available on our YouTube channel, just like last year. Another question, how reacts the fisherman to these device, catch limiting device, for example? So how do the fishermen react to catch limiting device?
Some have voluntarily been using them, so they clearly like it, and some do not. So I think that just answers it quite. It's they don't have to use it. It's voluntary, and some chooses to use it. And maybe Mike knows a little more about this actually.
We were developing a colleague of mine, Olafur Ingolfsson. He's done a lot of work with these catch limitation devices, and we developed one for the blue whiting fishery off the west coast of the British Isles and Ireland. And the boats we've used that on, as Ragnhild said, they asked, can we leave the systems aboard so that they can continue using them, because it is helping them with their fishing operations. They can predict how much they're going to catch. Within, with catches in that fishery can be 1,000 tons. Yeah. And they don't want 1,000 tons. No. That's not a good situation for them. No. So if they can limit it to 400 tons, or if they know they've only got 200 tons of capacity left in their hold, then they can do that. They can constrict the cod end and control exactly what they bring to the surface.
So that's a really positive thing. So
it's very positive.
They might be skeptical, but once they start using it, they're really enthusiastic about it, and they might tell others. And
it's more than just that. These, particularly in that fishery, the reason we first got involved actually was because of safety. If they get a very large catch, it can burst the cod end. So you can lose 1,000 tons of fish just through a burst cod end. But also the cod ends can sink. And if the cod end sinks while they're pumping, this kind of real health and safety impacts upon the crew on the deck.
Because it might drag the vessel down, or? A
couple of years ago, a winch crane was ripped off the deck. Wow. And the crew members around were lucky to survive the experience.
Yeah. So, and these are not small cranes, I assume.
No. So it's we're seeing some technologies where they see a real advantage for the fishing operations will be taken on.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, there's always a difference between fishermen. Of course, some are very progressive and more likely to try new things, and others are more are less likely to do that kind of things. Another question. I missed an explanation for the oxygen spike in the last graph of the device. Ragnhild?
The oxygen spike. No, I think if that's the one that during haulback. So this was cod fishery, and cod have a closed swim bladder. So when they are taken from 150 meters depth to the surface, their swim bladder will expand so much that it explodes, and it's almost only oxygen in the gas bladder of cod. So that causes a high spike in oxygen when it bursts. That can be measured. Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Clear explanation, I think. What's the price of the sensor globe?
Oh, then you have to contact Sensor Globe and ask them.
Okay. www.sensorglobe.com. Market prices are difficult to affect, but we are not powerless to provide incentives. True. Why not reward higher welfare fisheries with larger quota allocations? Interesting one. I think that accounts for welfare and other sustainability practices. It's something that I'm personally in favor, but you do not change systems easily. Mike, you have a bit more experience and expertise on this kind of regulation and management.
Well, I think sort of a quota bonus like that, I think is a good idea, because if you can demonstrate the particular mitigation measures are actually more sustainable, so you're reducing the impact upon your harvested stock, then there's strong justification to give additional quota, because less fish. You're transferring the fish you're killing accidentally into actual usable catch. Yeah. And I think there's a strong case for it. There would it would need to be science-based. You can't just, you need to have the evidence to demonstrate you've got that improvement in sustainability. But I think there's a good case for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it has a lot of impact, of course, on companies, and on people, their lives. So I think if you do this, you need to do this in a really good way. But yeah, I think it would work.
While you're looking, I've just got a quick question.
Sure.
So this was Animal Welfare Act, right? You mentioned that there was fish and crabs in the gill nets that have been set, but the headline was 23 porpoises. Was it the porpoises that he was prosecuted for, and the rest, the fish and the crabs, are just incidental? Do you have an opinion?
I think if it was only fish and crabs, he might not have been convicted based on the Animal Welfare Act, even though both crabs and fish are said equally with other mammals in that law. But this is my feeling of it.
Yeah, that's your opinion. Yeah. I was just curious, because that's my opinion too. In that, we are very selective about. Society is very selective about the animals it protects.
Yeah. And of course, they all suffered in that net, but I think the difference is that the other animals were, their purpose was to be catched, at least for the fishermen, exactly. And the porpoise were not supposed to be caught in the net.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, was that it? We have more questions?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Have you seen how stress affects the quality of the fish caught on board, such as quality of fillets? Well, maybe we can go into that a little bit now, but we will also have more information on that in other talks. So stay tuned if you're interested in that aspect. But is there something that you can say, what you saw in this study, Ragnhild?
In this particular study, we did not look into quality, but I actually did my PhD in the stress responses of cod and haddock being caught by trawl. And then I did see a clear effect of the level of stress, and also the type of stress, and how that affected the quality. So especially if the fish was confined via crowding or in nets, there is much more redness. So a cod fillet is supposed to be white, and it just becomes very blood filled if the fish is very stressed.
Yeah.
And in the case of gill nets, I did a study a couple of years ago. And then we could see that in any cases where we saw quality defects, and we then looked back at that individual and the stress level, it had an extremely high stress level.
Yep.
Yeah, but there were also cases where the fillets looked okay, and the fish had still been stressed. But it was at least, in our opinion, if the quality is bad, it's a safe guarantee that the fish has also been stressed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for people interested, after the break we will have a talk of John Roth that is about the link with quality in herring. And tomorrow we have a talk of Izumi from Nofima about the link with quality and welfare in tuna. So the sensor globe is very popular. Sensor globe looks very cool. I agree, it's like a Pokemon ball, right? How do you decide where this should be placed in or on the net?
Yeah, I used experienced fishermen for finding that out. Yeah.
That's where the fisherman knowledge comes in.
Yeah. Best ask a fisherman. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we tried to have it quite in the middle where we expected it to be most fish. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you see the power of collaboration.
Mm.
Okay. In Denmark, a recent expert commission recommends to consider including welfare aspects in the small Danish state-controlled label for low-impact fisheries, Natuurskansum. So that's more a remark or an addition to than a question, but interesting.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
Very good to hear.
I'm very curious about this label, but I will look into that later.
It's a proper news flash. It surprised us all, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for the answers. Okay, good. Oh, another question coming in from Denmark. Did you use split beam to record tail beat frequencies?
It's not a study I've done. That was a study by IMR, I think, wasn't it, Mike?
Yes.
So maybe you know something more about it. It's more than a 10-year-old. I just think it's a really nice example. I don't think it's really being used much for directly monitoring fish welfare, perhaps, but I see it as a promising technology at least.
Yeah, I know split beam echo sounders have been used to measure tail beat frequency, but I don't know. I don't know specifically for that example. No.